Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. I pray that you are excited and you are anticipating encountering God in a very powerful way. Whether, again, we're worshiping here in spirit and truth, and so I just really enjoy being with you. Real quick, before we kind of jump in, I just want to share with you a quick update and hope that you will think about this and get on board with us. On February, I believe it is, I'm going to double check. I just looked and February 26th, okay? If you would please mark this on your calendar, you will be receiving notification about this a little bit later on too. But on February 26th, we are going to be doing another I-92 meal pack. Now, if you remember, we have been doing this, or recall, we have been doing this for the past several years, where we have partnered with I-92 Ministries with Andy Pyatt, and we help raise some funds and we come here at the church, and this will be after the service on that particular Sunday, and we will have a lunch, and then we will go into the gym, and we will literally pack these what we call meals for Haiti, okay? And it consists of beans and rice, and we make these meal packs. And I believe, and I need to get this number, but we need to raise around $6,000 to $7,000, I believe is what it is. And with that $6,000 to $7,000, we're able to provide around 20,000 meals. So we'll literally pack 20,000 meals, and then it gets shipped off down to Haiti to help that particular country that is certainly in need of things like this. So I pray that you would just get behind it. I pray that you would contribute, that you would invest in this as we are going to be raising that money. And then I would ask that if you can, that you might come that Sunday in person, come and worship, and then afterwards have a quick lunch and help us pack. It's always a great time to come together and do something like that has that just enables us to be the feet and hands of Jesus. And so I pray that you would just consider that, mark that on your calendars. Please consider giving towards that. You can do that online. You can call here at the church, talk to Jim Stutzman. What you could send a check, whatever, but make sure you indicate that is for the I-92 Ministries. And that stands for Isaiah 9:2. So you need look that up. Okay, that's your homework. Look that up. One piece of your homework. As we get started, I want to share with you a call to worship. And so what I want to do is I want to read to you Psalm 15. So if you would just lean into this and just listen to this as it sets the tone of where we're going today. It says, Lord, who can dwell in your tent? Who can live on your holy mountain? And then he answers the question, the one who lives blamelessly, practices righteousness, and acknowledges the truth in his heart. Who does not slander with his tongue, who does not harm his friend or discredit his neighbor, who despises the one rejected by the Lord, but honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps his word, whatever the cost, who does not lend his silver of interest or take a bribe against the innocent. The one who does these things will never be shaken. I pray that you're ready to worship God and just exalt God's Son, Jesus. He's the one that draws all to Him. He's the one that we find hope. He's the one that we find healing, salvation, grace, mercy, all of those things. I pray that you will just we all join together and just lift Him up and exalt Him today. So if you would, why don't you stand and let's sing this next song together as we prepare our hearts.
We've waited for this day. We're gathered in your name, calling out to you. Your glory like a fire, awakening desire will burn our hearts with truth.
Have you ever met someone or been around someone that you saw something within them and you're like, man, I would really like to have that? And not in a sinful way, if I could say it that way, not in an unhealthy way, but you just saw something in them, maybe a character, hopefully a character trait's what I'm really getting at. But you saw something in them that you just thought, wow, that is, they are really well composed, or maybe they can deal with conflict really well. Maybe they have just a really great way of dealing with people. Maybe they have just this sense of calmness to them through all kinds of different turmoil, things like that, where they're steady, they're steadfast. I don't know, but have you ever just come across someone like that? Maybe you know someone like that right now. Maybe you can see their face right now as I ask that question. In our reading this week, we read about Elijah and Elisha. And I think, if I could just say it this way, Elisha, I think, saw that within Elijah. There was something within Elijah, obviously it was the power of God, that Elisha saw. And it really was magnetic for Elisha to be drawn to Elijah. By the way, one of the easy ways of remembering how the two are in order is do it alphabetically. Elijah and then Elisha. That's one way, because I know when it's easy to get confused and think, well, who came first? Which one was first? Was it Elijah? Was it Elisha? Which one was first? I look at it and just put it in alphabetical order. Elijah, I'm already messing up. Elijah and Elisha. And so today we're going to talk about these two. Now, what's really interesting, and I'm just going to share something with you, or what we're going to talk about is how, what did Elisha see, and then this relationship that they had with one another. And let me just share it with you. First of all, let me share with you a little bit about Elijah. Elijah was a prophet, and these two came kind of on the scene right after. If you remember last week, we talked about the nation dividing. Very sad story where the nation divides, right? Under Rehoboam's reign, God even said this is what's going to happen because this is what you've done. And so, and he told that to Solomon, essentially. But yet God's grace, and I always want to stay focused on this, God's grace never leaves us. God's grace never just divorces. God's grace never just walks away. God always is there pursuing us. And I think that's what we see clear through the through the whole Old Testament, is them departing God's ways, but yet God continued to pursue them. I think often we can look at it as God being very mean, God destroying, killing people, doing all these things, and we're going to certainly see it within these two guys' lives, essentially. Not that God destroyed or God was doing anything within their lives in a destructive way, but I mean some of the things that was happening in and around, or not in, but around them within the nation that had just been divided. But God's was, and I think it's easy to look at that as negative, but and this is probably another time that we talk about this, but I believe God was trying to get the people's attention. You're going in the wrong direction. You're going in the wrong direction. And I think God often gets held accountable or responsible for our own actions, for our bad decisions. Meaning that, let's say that someone drinks excessively and becomes drunk, which the Bible tells us not to do, but they become drunk, they get into a car, they drive off, they get in an accident, and they take the life of someone, some innocent soul, right? And then some of us will step back and say, God, how could you do this? That person made that choice to do that. Now, God, I get it. God has the power to prevent that. But if you think about it, we can't have a choice if God's going to take away our choices and prevent things, right? I get it. It's hard. It's hard to wrap our brains around it. But my point is this. In those days when the nation divided, they were doing things. They were choosing to do things that was outside of the will of God. And because of that, there were implications. There were natural implications. Let's say, let me give one more example. Let's say you have a man and a wife that's married, okay? And it is a sin to have relations, sexual relations outside of that marriage. Let's say that Let's say the husband or the wife, one of them, goes and has sexual relations with someone else and they acquire AIDS or something like that. They made the choice, and because they made that choice, I don't believe God cursed them or God made this happen to them, but it was a consequence in a sense, right? If they hadn't have done that, this wouldn't have happened. But they did it, and then it just so happened that it was with a person that had AIDS or whatever, and they contracted AIDS. So who's responsible for that? Is it God, or is it the person that made the choice? Does that make sense? And so what I'm saying is, when we go back and we look, God sent people like Elijah and Elisha to these wicked nations to say, you got to stop, or negative things are going to happen, because that's what happens when we make these choices. Sin destroys, sin devastates. Remember John 10:10, there's a thief that's coming to steal, rob, and wants to take away your life. Jesus says, I want to give you life in abundance. And so I believe God sent Elijah and Elisha and the prophets, other prophets, Isaiah that we'll talk about next week, Ezekiel, Hosea, Haggai, all kinds of prophets to come and to say, you've got to stop. You've got to move away from this because it's going to destroy you. This is not what provides you life. And so Elijah finds himself in the midst of that. And so in Elijah's life, we read about, and I'm just going to list, we read about some huge miracles that take place. And I'm going to read about 8 of those miracles. There may be more, but typically when you kind of search, you kind of see that there's about 8 miracles, okay? So let's just go through these very quickly. We're not going to dive into them. I'm going to give a scripture reference, and in fact, if you start in 1 Kings chapter 17 and you go through chapter 18, you're going to read a lot about the miracles that happened through Elijah's ministry or Elijah's service. Okay? And then the first part of 2 Kings, if you read the first 2 chapters, you will pick up on a couple more. So let's dive in. In 1 Kings, and these are the miracles. In 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1, we read about where Elijah comes and he tells them it's not going to rain for 3.5 years. And again, this is God trying to get their attention. But they were doing things that was very displeasing to God. And so God said, well, I'm going to hold back rain from you. So he sends Elijah to tell them this. And so that's what happens. And so there's this miracle that takes place through Elijah that it does not rain for 3.5 years. In 1 Kings 17, verse 14, it talks about a woman who had a son, and they were going to essentially die of hunger because they didn't have any money or anything like that. And Elijah performs a miracle where their food and their oil that never ran out. Never ran out. And their food supply would be there to sustain their life. In 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 22, we read about Elijah raising a widow's son from the dead. Okay? Healing and restoration. And then probably one of the biggest stories that we know about Elijah is when he's on Mount Carmel and he deals with the prophets of Baal. And you remember that whole story. And it's just a very powerful story where you have this false religion and they're, dancing around and Elijah's trying to show them that there is a God in heaven. Yahweh is very much alive, that there is only one God. And so we have this big slaughter of like hundreds and hundreds of Baal's prophets, this idol's prophets that was, serving serving Baal and, whatever it may be, and they got slaughtered. Elijah, he does that. Go back and read the story if you haven't read it. But what takes place is they can't perform the miracle that Elijah can through Yahweh. And so what happens is 400, or I think it's about 400 or so Baal prophets get slaughtered that day. And so that was another one. 1 Kings 18, chapter 41, we read about after this took place, after this Baal, the prophets of Baal get slaughtered, we read about then the heavens opening up and God sending rain. Okay, God sending rain, but it was a miracle that Elijah said, this is what's going to happen. It's now going to rain. 3.5 years has transpired. And so then it began to rain. In 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 10, we read about Elijah. And again, I'm not going into great detail here, but Elijah goes up on a mountain. He's sitting up on a mountain. And as he's sitting up here, this king sends a captain with 50 soldiers up to get Elijah. And as they come up, Elijah, God kills all of them. God kills them all. And so the message comes back somehow back to the king, hey, they're all dead now. And yet the king sends out another captain and 50 to go up to get Elijah. And the same thing happens. A miracle takes place where all of these soldiers or whatever, and the captain is killed. Happens twice. So the first time it happens in 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 10. And then in 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 12 and 14, you read the same thing happen. And then one of the last miracles that he does, he has Elisha with him at this time. And in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 8, he rolls up his cloak, or his mantle, if we could say it that way, his cloak, and he takes it and he strikes the river Jordan, the Jordan River. He strikes it with his mantle, and a miracle takes place where the waters part, and him and Elijah walk through on dry ground. Okay? So those are 8 miracles that we see that happens within the ministry or the life of Elijah. Elijah had this power. He had the Spirit of God with him. He had Yahweh doing these. It wasn't Elijah, but it was Yahweh doing these things through him. Well, what's very interesting then, the next thing we see is a protege, a mentor by the name of Elisha. Elisha sees this and he wants to follow Elisha. And then towards the kind of the end there of this relationship, Elisha says, I want a double portion of Elijah's spirit. The power and it wasn't out of greed. It was out of pure motives, okay? And he says, I want what Elijah had. I want a double portion of what Elijah had. I saw what Elijah had. And so then what we read is, we read that Elijah had performed around these 8 huge miracles within his life, and we can track and see that about 16 of these happened within Elisha's life. And let me just share with you those. In 2 Kings, and again, all of these are in 2 Kings chapter 2 through chapter 13, but in Elisha's life, we read in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 14, that he did the same thing at the Jordan River. He took his mantle, his cloak, he takes Elijah's, and he takes it, and he strikes the water once again, and he talks about the spirit of Elijah, and when he does, the water parts, and he was able to walk through on dry ground. We read about in 2 Kings 2, chapter 20, the healing of the waters, where there was some things taking place where they were getting sick, and then Elijah performs a miracle then and purifies the water where they're able to consume the water and not die. In 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 42, we read about 42 people cursing, these mockers cursing Elisha. And we read about him calling down fire on them and getting destroyed. In 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 17, we read about victory in them digging these trenches. Again, we're back into this situation where they don't have any water, where it's not raining, there's no water around whatsoever, but yet Elijah tells them, I want you to go dig a bunch of trenches. I just want you to go dig, and dig. And so they do, and the next thing that happens is these trenches become filled full of water that are able to sustain them. And so that was another miracle. Number 5, in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 5, we read about a woman that had no money, and she was, I think, another widow. She had no money to pay her debts, and Elijah comes, and she explains the situation. I think he's staying there at the house or whatever, and he tells her to go get as many jars as you can and fill them full of the oil, the little bit of oil that you have. And what happens is they keep filling the jars, and they keep getting more jars and more jars. The miracle was that the oil never ran out, and they sold the oil to pay off their debts. Number 6, 2 Kings verse 4:16. There was a Shunammite woman, which he stayed with this couple, this Shunammite couple, and they were barren. They did not have a child. And Elijah said, the next time I see you, you're going to have a child. And sure enough, the next time they came, there was a son that was given to this Shunammite family, this woman. In 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 35, we read that this son died, that Yahweh, just this miracle that gave this Shunammite family, had died, and word came back to Elijah, and Elijah went, and he laid over him a couple times, and the son was dead, but the son came back to life. And this is kind of interesting. He sneezed 7 times, and then he was okay. Isn't that interesting? But it was, again, nonetheless, a miracle. There was another story in 2 Kings, a miracle number 8, 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 41, where they had this pot where they were making stew, this group of people. They were making this stew, and when they would eat this stew, they would die. There was poison in this pot. And so Elijah does a miracle, and whatever, he tells them to add flour to it, and the next thing you know, it takes away whatever it is that's killing all the people, and then they're able to eat from this pot and not die. The 9th one is in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 43, where food is being multiplied, again, them needing food. The 10th one is 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 14, where there's a guy by the name of Naaman, and he had a skin disease, and we all know what that was. It was leprosy. And so he hears about Elisha, and he summons Elisha, and Elisha tells him, or tells his servant to tell him to go and to bathe in the Jordan 7 times, and you'll be healed. Naaman goes, he does exactly what he's told to do, and that's exactly what happens. He no longer has leprosy, which was a horrendous disease that would eventually take a person's life. The 11th miracle is found in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 27, and this is the leprous judgment on his servant Gehazi, where Gehazi wanted to, Naaman, remember, Gehazi goes to Naaman and says, this is what you need to do. And then Naaman wanted to give Elisha all of these gifts, some compensation or whatever it may be, his gratitude, to show his gratitude. Elisha didn't want any of it. It wasn't Elisha's to own. And Elisha said, I don't want any of it. Gehazi, which was Elisha's servant, thought Naaman was getting off kind of easy, so he goes back to Naaman and he takes it for himself. And what takes place next is Gehazi gets leprosy. The 12th one, 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 6. There's a bunch of people, they're a group of guys, they're out. This is their livelihood. They're building some things. They're chopping down all these trees. This one guy has an axe that he borrowed from someone. As he's striking this tree, the axe head falls off and goes into the water and goes to the bottom of the river. He kind of becomes hysterical because it's not his. He had borrowed the axe. He doesn't know what to do. Elisha goes and he makes the axe head literally float to the top of the water so that they can retrieve it. The 12th one, the 13th one, 2 Kings, verse 6, chapter 17. Again, Elisha is able to, God is giving Elisha insight into where this other king is going to come attack one of the kings of Israel. And so Elisha keeps giving this king of Israel intel. Well, the other king is thinking, who in my group is the traitor? Who's the one that's leaking this information? And everybody's saying it's not me. I mean, it's none of us. And so they find out it's Elisha. So they go and they find out where he's living, and they literally surround him. I mean, just multitudes. They're coming in to attack. His servant goes to the window, and he's petrified. He's freaked out as we would be as well. He comes back and reports it to Elisha. Elisha tells him, I want you to go, and I want you to look out the window now. And Elisha prays to God to open the eyes of his servant. And when he does, and the servant's eyes looks out the window the next time, all he sees is God's army just enthroned around this other nation that's going to take them. 2 Kings, right in the next verse, Verse 18, the army is defeated with blindness. Okay, the army is defeated with blindness. And we go down to verse 20 of that same chapter, and I think the servant even says to Elisha, hey, are we going to kill them all? And Elisha is like, nope, that's not what God's telling us to do. And so they bring them in, and their eyesight is restored, and they actually feed them. They give them all this food. And then in chapter 16, the last one is this, or the 16th miracle, the last one is this, 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 21. I think this is really interesting. These individuals are out burying one of their friends or something of that nature. As they're burying this person, they see this foreign army coming towards them, and so quickly they throw this guy into Elijah's grave. Elijah's grave. As soon as that dead corpse hits Elijah's bones, the corpse becomes alive again. Recitation. Talk about freaking you out, right? That's a miracle. So what we see is, I just list those to show you this. He received the double portion of Elijah's miracles. Elijah has about 8 miracles, and then Elisha performs about 16. So he did receive about a double portion of that. What's so interesting to me, it reminds me of that verse found, I believe it's in John, it's found in John 14:12, where Jesus says this, I'll paraphrase it, where Jesus says this, you've seen me do these things, but I'm telling you, you're going to do things even greater than me. Because He's going back to give us the Holy Spirit, and He's going to be asking the Father to allow these things to happen. And so Jesus is saying, you guys are going to be doing even greater things. It kind of reminds me of the same thing, right? That Elisha saw what Elijah had, and he wanted that double portion, and in fact, that's what he received. Now, let's drill this down let's take this and make it practical here for a second. And this is where I want to just become very personal here. Some of you may remember some of the spiritual giants within our church here at Element that have passed most recently. 3 of them that I just want to share with you today. Pastor Keith, or let's go in order. Keith Eisenman, if you remember him, Pastor Keith, and Shar Horkey. And there's more. But those are 3 of the most recent that I just want to share with you. If you knew the lives of these individuals, I think you saw something that you wanted. I think you saw something that you desired, not in a covetous way, but just like Elisha and Elijah. You saw within these individuals that they were spiritual giants. You saw something in them that were different. You saw something different with their character. You saw something different deep within their spirits. It was something vastly different than you don't see this a lot in our world today. And I remember when I did the funeral for each of these individuals, the thing that kept coming back to my mind was, they've left huge shoes to fill. They have left huge shoes to fill. And so when I look at this and think about this whole story between Elijah and Elisha, what I think of is kind of like what Paul talks about to Timothy, this mentor-mentee relationship. This where you have someone that is pouring into someone else, right? And so what you see is, you see something that they had, and it's like, I want that. I want that. I want to grow like that. I want to become spiritually mature like that. I want to become spiritually deep like that. I want my spiritual life to be characterized like theirs. And not that listen, they were humans. They were just mere humans. I get that. Okay? I'm not trying to elevate them. I'm just simply saying there was something different about Keith and Pastor Keith and Shar. There was just something different. And if you guys knew them, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And one of the things that they had was this powerful influence, right? They had this powerful influence that when you saw them, it was just like you were drawn to them. There was this magnetism to them. They had such sweet spirits. There was something vastly different. Something else that you saw within them was the sense of power. And it wasn't power of their own. Just like Elijah and Elisha, it wasn't power of their own. It was Yahweh working through these individuals. Just like Keith and Pastor Keith and Shar, they had this power within them. This power, and it was the Holy Spirit at work. Because they submitted, they surrendered to the power of the Holy Spirit within their lives. And because of that, they had this powerful influence and they had power within. They had focus. They had commitment. They were focused on the goal. They were committed to run the race. They had this laser focus on running the race well. I think about Elijah and Elisha. Do you remember when Elisha said, I want to follow you, Elijah? And Elijah said, okay, but you got to come after me. There's a commitment here. And even Elijah tried to shirk Elisha a few different times, but Elisha stuck. He stuck and stayed, right? We saw that in the life of Jesus too, where he would turn to all this multitude of people following him and say certain things like, if you can't drink my blood and eat my flesh, you're not worthy to be my disciple. If you don't hate your father and mother, your family more than me, love me more than them, and hate, kind of hate them in a sense. And what he was doing, he was saying that the love for me would seem like hate compared to the, you know what I'm saying. The love that you have for me. The love you have for the love that you have for your family would seem like hate because compared to the intense love you have for me. He wasn't saying literally hate them, but he was saying that your love is going to be so much more passionate for me. That's what Elijah was doing with Elisha. And for 38 miles, they walked. For 38 miles, they walked. They took this hike for 38 miles. Elisha followed Elijah. And he stayed. And there was a point where even Elisha went back. If you remember that whole story, Elisha went back after Elisha put his mantle, his cloak on him. He went back and he left his past. Not that his past was evil, but he left what was known to him. And he burnt, if you remember, he burnt his plow that he used to plow the fields because that was no longer him. He burned it, he slaughtered his cattle, and he cooked it over that fire. And it was signification to say, I'm done with this life. I'm following you. I think it was Hudson Taylor that great missionary that went to China, as they went, he told them when they got off the ship, burn the ship. Why? Because there's no going back. I think of another situation. There was a Civil War general, and I can't remember who it was, but there was a Civil War general. Every time they would cross a bridge, he told them to burn the bridge. There's no going back. One more example. In Ephesians, when Paul talks about the armor of God, the Romans would have clicked in and understood exactly what he was talking about because he used the elements of their attire, their armor. Do you know the only place that they did not have protection, where they were exposed? Their back. Why? Because there's no turning your back. There's no going back. That's what this 38 miles was with Elisha and Elijah. That's what I think about with Keith and Pastor Keith and Shar. There was this intense focus. There was this commitment. There was no going back. We've burned the ships. We burned the bridges. I've got my armor on. My back is exposed. I am not turning and I'm not going back. I will stay committed and focused on the goal. They weren't perfect people. No one's perfect. They were human. But man, did they have something. Did they not have that? And lastly, I think what we all saw within these individuals was they had this sense of peace. They had a sense of contentment. They had a sense of, I don't need the world. I don't need all the riches. I don't need all the glory. I don't want any of that. That's not what I desire. And consequently, because of that, they had this sense of peace because they wanted God. They wanted Jesus. They wanted to exalt Jesus. And there is many of us in this church here at Element that has been, our lives have been touched in a powerful way and influenced in a powerful way by these individuals. These are individuals that we need to follow. And I'm going to close by saying this. Who's the next Elijah here? Who's the next Elisha here? There are big shoes that need to be filled, and this story is continuing to be written. Are you going to play a part in this story of God like these guys, like these people that we talked about? It is my prayer that you do, and I pray that you just continue to think about that this week and maybe recommit your life to God with fervency and vibrance. Have a great week.
worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you. I worship you. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who